Welcome, Congressman Lamb.
Hey, everybody. Thank you
Well,
for giving me a chance to come on.
welcome to Bedford County Democrats. We are so honored to have you on here with us this evening. My name is Valerie Powick. I'm the chair of the Bedford County Democratic Party. It's a real pleasure to have you on here. We're going to give you an opportunity to tell us about yourself, what we already don't know. We've been sharing all of your information around and getting people up to speed on where your campaign's at, what you've been doing, all the hard work that you've been doing for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we're going to take questions from the audience at that point. So welcome,
Great.
Congressman Lamb.
Well, thank you very much. I've been in Congress now. I'm in my third term, and it's been the honor really of my lifetime to serve there. It was a tough road to get there. My first district had a lot of areas in it that are like yours, Greene County, parts of Washington County and Westmoreland. And President Trump had won that district by 19 percentage points. We came back and won it by 700 votes in a very, very hard fought campaign, a grassroots campaign, an old fashioned campaign. There was a lot of money spent against me on the airwaves at that time, every possible attack ad you could think of. And we still came out on top just by outworking them. And a lot of what I did then was just go out and talk to people, go into any union hall, any bar, any church, any Rotary Club, any gun club that would have me, and take people's questions and show respect for their views. And in a lot of those rooms, there were no strong Democrats, but I got used to talking to people like that. And I think that's what I really bring you in this race. The other candidates we have are good people with their own life experience, but they haven't had that political experience of going against a Republican like that in that kind of territory and actually winning. And we've now done that 3 times, and I've learned a lot along the way. I've built a team that knows how to win in these circumstances. Amy is with us tonight. She was with me back then. A lot of my Senate campaign is like that. It also means I've been tested as far as attacks and what the Republicans can do. They've tried it all over the course of those 3 campaigns. It hasn't worked. People have heard my side of the story and what I'm about and what I do, and they've supported me despite all those attacks. So you're not going to find out anything new about me in this campaign. Again, I don't think that's true for the other candidates who just haven't been tested to that same degree. Now, although I've been representing very politically competitive territory, I've had to work really hard to survive there. My votes are in favor of the Democratic positions on every key issue. As a member of the House majority, we have passed a bill on every subject you could possibly care about or want us to address. Unfortunately, all of it practically has been ignored in the United States Senate. It's a big part of the reason I wanted to run for the Senate, to try to break that gridlock. But as a House member, I've already voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and protect a woman's right to choose by putting Roe v. Wade into law, no matter what the court does, protect unions with the PRO Act, protect voting rights with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, address gun violence and address climate change and make prescription drugs cheaper, extend the child tax credit and all the things that Biden wanted and Build Back Better, I voted for. And I would vote the same way in the Senate. So with me, you have a little more certainty and a little bit less risk about how I'm going to perform in the campaign, and then also how I'm going to vote as a senator, because I've already voted on a lot of this stuff. And I've learned a lot about the teamwork that it takes to be a legislator and the relationships. And I think I could really hit the ground running in this job. So I'm in favor of setting aside the filibuster. That's very much a question of the day. I have been for a while. I just think it has no place at this point because of the way it makes it impossible for us to get things done. And because frankly, most of the Republicans over there just aren't interested in doing anything, and we shouldn't make it easier for them to rule in a minoritarian way. It's not an important part of our tradition. What we're really trying to do is protect the right of every American to be part of a majority and vote for what they want. So with that, I'd love to talk about anything you guys want to suggest or answer any questions or however you want to. It's back to you, Madam Chairwoman, however you want to handle it.
Thank you, Congressman. At this point, what we're going to do is if people have a question, raise your hand, then you'll be able to unmute and ask your question. Glenn Rogers has his hand up. So Glenn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And Congressman, thank you for being with us today. I had two. One issue is social justice is really the encompassing theme for my concerns. And I have two dimensions I wanted to ask you about, specifically on environmental justice, the notion of how to move ahead and what type of carbon pricing on carbon pollution would you support so that the market can decide what our carbon load is on our environment. And my second issue is the connected issues of supremacy in Pennsylvania and supremacy among settlers in Israel-Palestine. And I think that for us as a nation, we have to advance the Palestine-Israel peace solution in order to have control of supremacy at home. So my question is, what would you do concretely to advance the Israeli-Palestine two-state solution that you propose on your website?
Great. On the first issue, it's important to know that President Biden really prioritized environmental justice in his campaign, talked about it a lot, came to places in Western Pennsylvania where that's a real thing, where we have rusted out steel mills and copper mills and power plants and coal mines and all the rest of it. And then what he did was he put in Build Back Better some very, very serious amounts of money specifically dedicated to environmental justice. So basically grant programs that would allow local communities, community-led organizations to apply for these funds to remediate some of these sites, create jobs in their place, stimulate clean energy or new industries in their place. He put his money where his mouth is, and it would be historic. It would be once in a lifetime. Of course, we have passed that in the House and it is stalled in the Senate. So that's the work that's there to be done in terms of new investment. I know that the EPA administrator is really interested in doing whatever he can with executive authority to, toughen the regulations at some of these places and lessen the burden that these communities bear. But ultimately, we really have to reinvest in a lot of them. And I know what these places look like. I represent them. They're brown fields. They're toxic. It's going to take money to be cleaned up. But there are new things we can bring into their place. Just one example: there's a coal mine, or a coal-fired power plant that closed in my district, and a company that wants to make hydrogen has looked at it as a possible site. Nuclear power companies have looked at it as a possible site. There's a really obvious transition to cleaner industries that can help provide carbon-free energy, but the government has to be a partner. So basically, by the short answer to your question is by pushing forward Build Back Better, we can really start to take that head on. The second issue is a little more complicated. The United States has for a long time had it as the official position that we were in favor of a two-state solution. But there's a lot of fear, honestly, in Washington, D.C. that has all but been abandoned in practice, and that the more Israel has allowed the settlements and the more deeply entrenched that they become, it becomes increasingly difficult. I'm from the school of thought that just because something is difficult, you don't give up on it. And I think it's crucially important that we stick with our tradition and that we remember our role is to try to get the Israelis and the Palestinians to the table talking to each other. If you watched President Trump, if you saw Netanyahu come to the United States during the Obama administration and address Congress as if he was Republican, you might have started to think that our role was only ever to be a cheerleader for Netanyahu and his government. That is not true. Israel is a crucial ally. I'm a defender and supporter of Israel and its right to exist, and I very much value them as an ally, but we don't owe our political allegiance to one particular politician in that country. The policy of this government is to support a two-state solution and do whatever it takes diplomatically to get those two sides to the table and talking to each other. It's hard, frankly. There's a lack of leadership on the Palestinian side at this point, and we have a new Israeli government, and it's a little difficult to assess what their track record or willingness is going to be. But we have to keep trying. That is the role that we need to play.
Glenda's, thank you. Glenda's, any more questions or does that answer what you needed answered?
If we have a second, if you could expand a little bit on what can we do to reduce settler violence and supremacy actions among the settlers in Israel that I view are largely funded by the United States.
Uh, I may have to take that one to talk to you about another time, Glenn. I know from news reports a little bit about what you're talking about. I don't know that I know firsthand of the nexus of U.S. funding to that. I believe that we really try to limit our funding to the IDF missile defense systems. I know that there are groups trying to focus on whether or not U.S. military aid is used in the construction of new settlements, the raising of Palestinian properties and territory, and people have talked about the conditioning of aid. My impression up to this point is that existing law covers that and prevents it. But if you have more that you want me to know or consider about that, that's probably a pretty nuanced one, and I wouldn't want to do you a disservice by going out beyond my skis on that. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nina? You're muted.
Am I okay now?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I'm very sorry. It's been a while between Zoom calls.
Yes.
Congressman, I know that you have done an amazing job in your own district. And this group here you're talking to tonight, nothing matters more to us right now than winning that Senate seat. How do you feel? Can you talk a little bit about your strengths in running statewide?
yeah, sure. I think the biggest strength that I bring is experience pulling people into my camp from the middle or from a swing voter perspective, independents, moderate Republicans, while still getting a really large base turnout of Democrats. And we've gotten a large base turnout of Democrats in all three of my races. Now, I know one of the things that is behind your question is demographically, I have represented one type of district, very white districts, frankly, white working class districts. There's a lot more to the state of Pennsylvania than that. I've been spending, pretty much every extra day or hour that I have in Philadelphia and up the Lehigh Valley, spending time with the African American community, the Latino community. I will say they have been very, very receptive to me in my campaign. A lot of those community leaders, church leaders, union leaders, local elected officials are actually pretty moderate in their own views. We've seen some evidence of that in other places like New York City's mayor race. It makes a lot more sense to me now, I guess, that I've been spending more time in Philadelphia. So I wouldn't assume that, because I have mostly represented white districts that I won't succeed in those areas. I think I will. And I'm going to work very, very hard at it. That's what I've always done. Showing up, listening to people, making an honest effort to understand their point of view goes a very, very far way. In a lot of these places, I'm the only candidate that's been there so far, which is surprising to me. But I think we're gonna really show you something on that regard. So,
Thank you.
Who had their hand up? I'm sorry. Well, I have a question then I'll ask you, Congressman.
sure.
So Bedford County, I'm not sure if you've been to Bedford County yet, and we're welcome. We'd love to have you here as soon as it's safe and possible to welcome you here. But are you aware of the events that happened here in our county in August of, my gosh, guys, is it 2020 or 2019? 2020. Yeah.
I am.
Are you aware? Okay. A lot of us have a concern about Second Amendment, gun rights. How can you speak to, and that's an issue that is going to be a driving force here in our county as to how we're able to have conversations with persuadable folks and Republicans that are perhaps on the fence about a Republican candidate. How can we address that, and how will you address that here?
Yeah. Well, first on just the general point, I always find it very important to emphasize with people that the Constitution gives most people the right to own a firearm. It gives no person the right to break the law. And the allegation in that case is that someone broke the law by shooting at innocent unarmed people. My knowledge of that situation comes from the fact that someone in the group working on the response to all of this was friendly with the statewide union official for the federal government employees, who himself is a prison guard. I don't know exactly how the connection was made. His name's Phil, and he called me one day, probably 3 or 4 months ago, and he knew that I used to work for DOJ, and he wanted to know on behalf of this group if there was someone that they could reach out to in the federal government, because they felt they were not getting a good response from the county DAs, and also, I guess, from the state attorney general's office. And so I connected Phil with some of my colleagues from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Pittsburgh, and also gave him some resources for the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. So I don't know. I haven't gotten any follow-up since then. I don't know if that group has followed those leads, but if there's more to be done there from a contact perspective, you all can feel free to let me know after this, and I'd be happy to try and help again. But that is something that, the Civil Rights Division of DOJ was really created to try to address situations like this, originally in the South, where local governments wouldn't take seriously acts of racist violence. And I know that was the allegation in this case too. And so if there's a way they can contribute and get to the bottom of it, they have to. But on gun rights, it's really an amazing and difficult thing, because when you know gun owners and you get to talk to them in a political context, they are law-abiding people who obey, don't just obey the law, but respect the law, and they think other people should too. Most of them have passed background checks to get their firearms, and there's just something that makes it so difficult for them to support a requirement that everyone should have to do the same thing, and to support common sense efforts just to stop the law from being broken. I mean, the vast majority of gun crime in our country is driven by people who have guns in their hands illegally. It's not really driven by legal gun owners in most cases. But the reason that they get guns illegally so easily is because for a long time, the NRA and other gun lobby groups attacked ATF's real ability to enforce the law. They won't let them have a computerized database to keep track of gun records. Something as basic as that. There's an enormous warehouse in West Virginia filled with papers. And if you're part of a shooting investigation like I have been before, it's really hard to track down information about where the guns come from. So there's just a lot we need to do that is very basic in its nature, should be supported, as the polls tell us, by 90% of people. And maybe what it is just an issue of who the messenger is, and maybe someone like me who is a Marine and owns a firearm and is comfortable holding them and shooting them and talking about them, can try to deliver that message in a way that hasn't worked for people in the past. I don't know, but it is a tough one. There's no question.
It really is. It's the line in the sand for a lot of conversations here that we try to have. So thank you. Jeff Dugan.
Ooh. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
Wanted to ask a question, something that affects everybody, is our fuel prices. Is there anything things are looking into more for fuel pricing, whether it's home heating or diesel or gas for vehicles? It's really affecting everybody.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, Biden opened the strategic reserve for petroleum to try to help with gas prices. They've come down a little bit since he did that, actually. Their height, I think, was in November. But really, we need to try to convince other countries to drill more and get more into the market. That's the problem. The demand for gas came faster back than the gas itself. There's no burden that we're putting on the process. In fact, we're practically begging the OPEC countries to drill more. And so I do think he's doing everything that he can possibly do. Again, we're trying to help families all over America with their basic costs by doing things like supporting the child tax credit, for example, to put money back into people's pockets when they have kids, especially. And so we're doing everything that we can to kind of untangle this knot caused by the pandemic. And I know it's hard, and we can't pretend that it isn't, or that, we can't pretend it's a good situation. It's not. But I can guarantee you that he's doing everything he possibly can. And they do think the situation is going to get better, both with gasoline, with natural gas, with the way that you heat your home. Those companies, they like a higher price after all these years when the prices have been low on many of these things, so that they can make a little bit of money And that's the other thing he's done is he's starting to go after some of these companies on antitrust grounds with the allegation that they are actually colluding to keep the prices high. And so that may be something that in its own right spurs them into a little bit more action.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Dave.
So speaking of fuel and carbon, I'd like to follow up on Glenn's question a little further. Simulations developed by scholars at MIT show that the most effective approach to reducing carbon is to actually put a price on it. And so you price the damage in with the fuel that's being used. Have you been briefed on carbon pricing? Is that part of any position that you're developing?
Yeah, and you remind me now, he asked me that about a specific price in the first question, and I forgot to answer it. Sorry about that. Yes, I would say I've spent more of my time in these 4 years trying to learn about and understand the energy transition than any other issue. I know it is the key long-term challenge of the United States, both from a national security perspective and just a basic economic perspective. You're right, the gold standard, the most elegant solution, the best solution would be a price on carbon. Unfortunately, the environmental left has largely abandoned that position. And if anything, it's becoming like a moderate Republican position again, oddly enough. I think the American Petroleum Institute thinks that they can beat us to the punch by supporting it and putting the price really low. We don't really count the votes for it at this point in Washington. That was why Biden did what you would call the second best thing, which was this clean energy payments program, where you try to achieve the same goal, but instead by directly paying producers of electricity that use carbon-free energy, so like the nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania, for example. That was in Build Back Better. Manchin stripped it out. We are nowhere on that yet. But yeah, I do think in an ideal world you would price carbon. You guys can tell me. My general sense is you have to get it over $50. Probably closer to 100 if you could. Most people think you would start it low and scale it up over time, and that would help establish a market. So, then not only would companies be paying into it as sort of a tax, but then you'd have companies like a company that makes steel, or even a company that makes electricity with natural gas, that would have an incentive to capture the carbon because they.
Well, Congressman, we lost your audio.
Sorry, did I freeze again? I'm the one who's in a major city and you guys are in Bedford, and I'm the one whose internet is freezing. Sorry about that.
We're back.
Did you have something you wanted to say on that, Dave?
No, that's good. So, it sounds like you're talking about the pricing that the companies would pay, not the consumers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the best carbon price proposals that I have seen, there's one by Citizens Climate Lobby that I think is a good example. They try to levy the cost at the smallest number of points in our economy by doing it kind of at the production site. So, they have these stats that say there's X number of oil refineries in the United States, they would pay the carbon price. There's X number of power plants in the United States, they would pay it. So rather than trying to put it directly on the consumer, they would put it at higher points in the food chain. Obviously, those companies would then pass the cost on to the consumers, so they would feel it indirectly. But I think that's how people think it would actually be imposed.
So would you support that sort of a solution?
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I'm just telling you that like we're not even close to that in Washington in terms of people supporting it, in part because the support for it has dropped out on both the left and the right. I think what happened is that the environmental community tried to get some carbon pricing measures at the state level and failed, and it has failed in other countries as well, and they became convinced that you wouldn't succeed. So that's the problem, is it lacks critical mass in either party at the moment. So I totally see the merits of it. And in the long term, I'm open to trying to get there, but I'm just being honest with you that that's a tough climb on that. And that was why Biden didn't even try that road. They kind of went straight for option number 2.
Okay, thank you.
Marianne?
Congressman, China has invested a lot of money in research into nuclear fusion, and other European countries also, which that type of energy leaves no nuclear waste. Has our country have any idea of pursuing that?
Yeah, we actually have we have a few promising ventures on fusion, but one of them is one I had the chance to visit. It's on the grounds of MIT up in Boston, or I guess Cambridge. And after doing that, I got so excited about it that I led an amendment that made it into law at the end of last year to increase the amount of funding for fusion research here in the United States. So they're getting more research funding this year than they have before. And if you look them up, the project at MIT is called Commonwealth. They actually turned it into a private company, but it exists at MIT. And they had to invent their own type of magnet. That was the key breakthrough that they needed to be able to contain the energy. And so they tested that magnet this past summer successfully for the first time. And so the United States is doing better in that competition than you might think, not all that well.
Thank you.
Carlton?
Yes, Congressman, it's good to see you again. I was with the Blair County Democrats on Monday night. I live sort of at the border of Blair and Bedford County, so I participate in both. Anyways, tonight on the CBS Evening News, I saw about the inflation of everyday items, what can be done at the federal level to stop the inflation of groceries and other daily use items. That's based on what I saw on the news tonight.
Yeah, great question and good to see you again. Basically, the two key parts of this equation are we have to do everything we can to untangle the supply chain bottlenecks that exist. That's a huge part of this, and it is caused by the pandemic. So you have too many people chasing too few goods. Why do you have too few goods? It's because overseas, people in factories, on farms, the people that produce a lot of stuff have been getting sick, or their ports are jammed up, or they don't have enough shipping containers, or whatever the case. I can tell you the administration is going full throttle to try to fix that, and some of the prices have actually improved in that time period. The other side of the ledger is helping families with everyday costs. That's what Build Back Better is about. That's why all the economists have said Build Back Better helps with inflation, meaning helps bring it down. It doesn't make inflation worse. And what it does is it gives money to family with children so that they can afford that little extra and be a little bit ahead. It puts a massive number of Americans back into the workforce. Just getting more Americans in the workforce itself helps with inflation, because there are places where they're charging more for stuff because they don't have enough truck drivers on the road to bring the stuff there. They don't have enough people in their warehouse or in their grocery store stocking the shelves, and everything becomes more expensive. We still have slightly fewer people in the workforce than before the pandemic. One of the big reasons we have so few people in the workforce is because parents with young kids, especially single mothers with young kids, don't have childcare for them, and they can't go back into the workforce. That's why Build Back Better puts such a big emphasis on childcare. So we really do have the answers. We're stuck in the Senate right now. You guys know that. That's why I'm running for this, and I want so passionately to win and get there and deliver the key vote that we need.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and then I think we're going to have to say goodbye for this evening to Congressman Lamb. So do we have a final question on here? Any comments or things that we want to talk about before we let you go? Or do we just want to thank you once again for joining us, for letting us listen to you and get to know you? We look forward to more events Amy will keep in touch. I don't doubt that at all. So it was a real honor and a privilege to have you with us this evening.
Thank you guys for having me, and honestly for having such interesting questions. You know, sometimes I get the same questions over and over again, but I haven't gotten Israel, Palestine, or fusion energy in quite some time. So it helps keep me sharp. I really appreciate it. This is not a substitute for an in-person visit. I look forward very much to coming and campaigning in your area.
So do we.
I'm going to fight for every single vote in Bedford County, not just the Democrats. We're going to make some gains. I really believe we can do that. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank
Really appreciate it.
you.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you so much.